All right, now it's time to meet Dr. David Jockers as he answers some very important questions for you. For example, what do blood sugar levels and insulin have to do with a damaged heart? You'll also find out what conventional cardiology fails to understand about protecting your heart, plus a very special way to greatly improve the strength of your heart muscle. By the way, in this video, you'll also hear from Dr. Rashid Buttar as he outlines some very smart ways to fix heart problems. But first, enjoy this presentation with Dr. David Jockers. So David, thank you very much for being with us. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, it's really an honor to be here. Thanks for
All right, so let's talk about what the heck does blood sugar and insulin have to do with fixing heart cells? Help us out.
Well, see, sugar is an energy source for all the cells of our body. However, when our blood sugar gets too high, a state of hyperglycemia, the sugar molecules will actually bind to proteins in our bloodstream. And that actually creates something called an advanced glycation end product. Or if you take the first letter of each of those words, A for advanced, G for glycation, E for end product, AGE. So what do you think that does to us? It ages us. And these AGEs become extremely oxidative. So they cause a lot of damage, a lot of free radical damage that basically is like shrapnel going through our bloodstream. Damages those endothelial lining of the blood vessels, creates scar tissue development, and creates blood clots over time, right? So in order to keep our blood sugar stable, because again, this state of high blood sugar is so toxic for the body, toxic for the endothelial lining, also toxic for the brain, the nerves, the kidneys, all those regions, the body produces insulin. And insulin's job is to take sugar out of the bloodstream and put it into the cells, okay? So it gets the high blood sugar down into a normal, natural range, okay? However, if we keep eating foods and living a lifestyle that elevates our blood sugar, we need more and more and more insulin to get the sugar out of the bloodstream. We actually end up creating a condition called insulin resistance. And when we have to produce a lot of insulin, you know, there's kind of a bell curve, right? So there's this optimal amount of insulin we should be producing whenever we consume food. If we have to produce a lot more insulin, insulin turns on pro-inflammatory gene pathways. So it actually triggers genes that promote the formation of inflammation in our system. On top of that, insulin, when it's elevated in our bloodstream, it also stops fat burning. So we can't actually burn fat for fuel. So we end up becoming a fat storer. And at the same time, again, we're turning on inflammation. And we know that inflammation will also damage those blood vessels, right? Will also damage the actual cardiac cells and cause dysrhythmia, right, in our heart. You know, a lot of people are dealing with AFib, right, or different problems with cardiac cell, with actually conducting the electrical current that runs through the heart cells to give it the proper beat-by-beat ratio. Right?
Wow, that's amazing.
Yep.
What you're saying right there alone, I hope people are listening. All the pre-diabetics and the diabetics out there, actually imagine all of them being told when they go to the doctor that the fact that you're having trouble balancing your blood sugar is having a negative electrical impact on your heart. Mind-blowing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, inflammation and high blood sugar and high insulin what actually damages all these key areas, right? So the electrical current or the SA node, right, which helps kind of, like the orchestra, conduct that electrical current in the heart, becomes damaged by inflammation. And so, you know, high blood sugar, insulin, we've got to control that if we're going to have good heart health.
It is such a toxic thing. I'm wondering how many people who have blood sugar problems are even being told that this is connected. I think a lot of people hear the news out there. I think that is generally accepted. Oh, diabetes is not good for heart disease, but this is a very serious thing. I think people also don't realize how much things have changed over the years. You could probably speak to this for a moment. The idea of what the ideal blood sugar should be, and these labs that are saying, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it, your blood sugar now is 100 or 105. That's not too bad. because most people might have like resting ones of 120 or 130. Talked about what levels are really where we should be ideally and what's really happening as a society. It's really getting out of hand.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in general, your blood sugar really should be under 100, okay? So 126 and above is a fasting blood sugar of 126 or above is considered diabetic, okay? But in that 100 to 125 range, we call that pre-diabetes, right? So you still have a state of insulin resistance where your body's not responding well to insulin. It's producing a lot of insulin. Most doctors are actually not even testing the amount of insulin that's being produced, okay? So you can have your blood sugar, you can even have it in a healthy range, right? You might even have it under 100, okay? So your fasting blood sugar might be 80, right? Which is actually a healthy fasting blood sugar. However, your insulin might be really high. And that's kind of that's the early phase, right? Where your body's actually producing more and more insulin. It's keeping your blood sugar in check, but you've got to produce all this insulin, which is promoting inflammation in the body.
For the new person out there, though, real quick, the fasting blood sugar, how
Yes.
long are they not eating to then measure their blood? What is that?
Yeah, so to test a good fasting blood sugar, usually it's about 12 to 14 hours fasting. So you get your blood test done in the morning, let's say 8 a.m. in the morning, and you haven't eaten since like 6 or 8 the night before. Anything with calories. You can drink water, you can do black coffee if you want to, although that may increase your blood sugar a little bit. So typically we just tell people just drink water in the morning when you wake up, go in and get your blood work done, and that's going to give you your levels.
And what about insulin? You just mentioned that
Yeah.
at the tail end. What's kind of normal? What's getting a little out of hand? Give us an understanding about that.
For sure. Well, basically the way as a functional medicine doctor, I like to see fasting insulin. So you can get it tested right with your fasting blood sugar, very inexpensive add-on that you can always ask your doctor to add. Most doctors, by default, are not testing it. So you want to ask your doctor for this. It ideally should be roughly around 2 to 5, okay? 2 to 5, and I think that's units per, I can't remember exactly the measurement there, but it's 2 to 5. Now, most doctors are not going to say anything till it's up over 10, okay? But, if you're in that 8, 9, 10 range, for a lot of doctors, they're not going to say anything till it's up over 20, okay? And so that you're producing a lot of insulin, and again, you're promoting inflammation and you're stopping your ability to burn fat for fuel when you have elevated fasting insulin levels. So again, roughly in that 2 to 5 range is ideal.
And we're not trying to make people crazy, I'm sure you would agree, but it would be a really good idea for those people, especially who are very concerned about heart disease and the path that they're going, to really have a very good understanding about how they're testing, not just once, but over and over again over time, a year, 2, 3 years. Are you going in that path where your numbers, your inflammatory markers are going up? What you're talking about, your fasting blood sugar is going up and it's not under control. Insulin numbers are going too high. It's really good to just understand these things so that you can really respond. I don't think a lot of people get enough feedback to really know, red alert, something's wrong here.
I absolutely agree. And that's a way to know if your diet, your stress levels, your sleep, if that's working for you. Because if you test, let's say, you're new to a healthy lifestyle and you test and your fasting insulin is 15, okay, but then you test 3 months later and it's 6, okay? Now it's not in that 2 to 5 range, but it's come down significantly. You're moving in the right direction, as opposed to, if it stays the same or we only get a very small incremental change. There are a lot of things you can do to bring down your blood sugar and your insulin levels and get back into that optimal range.
Okay, so we're going to focus in now, making people more aware about what's damaging their heart cells. Let's make this really clear, David, about some of those biggest threats out there that are hurting their cells.
For sure. Well, number one thing is inflammation, right? Inflammation is damaging our heart cells, our cardiac cells. It's also damaging the endothelial lining, or the inner lining of the blood vessels. Because when we look at heart disease, we look at the actual functionality of the heart cells themselves, right? How good are they at contracting, at producing energy? But on top of that, we also have to look at all the blood vessels, right? In fact, we actually have 60,000 miles of blood vessels in our body. Can you believe that? That could circle the equator 2 times. And so we've got to understand, what is the health of the actual blood vessels themselves? They should be elastic, so they should be able to expand and then contract, expand and contract. When inflammation comes in, it damages that inner lining, and now they lose that elasticity. So now they're very static, which increases pressure in the blood vessels. Over time, obviously, it can lead to hypertension. And so this is a major issue. Inflammation damages that, as well as it damages what's happening in the actual heart itself, the actual cardiac cells, and the mitochondria, which are what produce the energy within all those heart cells. They become damaged and dysfunctional as well.
I love what you're saying already. I hope it's really crystallized for people right away, already what you've said in just 2 minutes. This idea of inflammation growing inside the vessels, cellular energy is going down. All of this is happening at the same time. Person's body is breaking down. Blood pressure starts to go up because you need it so bad to get the blood to areas as your body is getting weaker. Now the damage is occurring. Then the plaque is building up. Then the medications are going in. Then you get the stroke and heart disease down the road. It doesn't happen right away, but what you're describing is really the beginning. What are some of these things? Because I think a lot of people are familiar already with what you started with. Inflammation damages cells. Okay, great. But what's causing the inflammation? Let's identify some of those enemies.
Yeah, for sure. Well, things that we already talked about. High blood sugar, high insulin. That's probably the most common things in our society. But there are a lot of other things. One is infections. So you can have oral infections that get down into your system, can cause a lot of problems with your heart, a lot of problems with your circulation, cause massive inflammation in the system. So infections, whether it's oral infections, whether it's systemic infections like Lyme disease, for example, or Epstein-Barr viral infections, or it could be gut-related infections, right? So we could have dysbiosis in our gut that can drive up inflammation in our system as well.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but again, to be really clear about, infections, come on. An infection that has like a full-blown flu that's got you on your back, you're not only describing those. It could be some like Epstein-Barr, something smoldering that you don't necessarily feel so terrible, but this is happening in the background. It's causing a lot of cellular inflammation. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, yeah. So those kind of chronic systemic infections where, again, you don't have, you're not, bent over a toilet bowl puking. You just don't feel good on a regular basis, wearing down your whole system. And that's because it's driving up inflammation and your body's not able to fully eliminate it. So we've got to get to the root of those and start to get those eliminated or put into a state of remission in our body. That's super important. So that's a big thing. Toxicity is another big thing. We have more environmental toxins coming into our system than ever before, whether it's heavy metals, whether it's things like mold or mycotoxins that we might be breathing in or eating in our foods. We have plastics and parabens and all kinds of other commercialized environmental toxins. We've got pesticides, we've got things like glyphosate that are in our food system, our water. People are spraying it on their yards. So all these things drive up inflammation in our system as well. So that's another really big factor. Chronic stress, just mental emotional stress in general, drives up stress hormones. And stress hormones are made to give us the ability to either fight or flight, right? Either fight or run. In order to do that, just kind of like when we're exercising, we need to increase blood sugar. Sugar is a very quick energy source for our body, right? And we don't need oxygen to break it down. So our body can utilize that when we don't have enough oxygen, like when we're exercising. But if we're under emotional stress, let's say we have a fight with our spouse, or we're in traffic, or we're going through a financial hardship, or maybe a family member's sick, and we're dealing with this constant emotion of stress, we're driving up stress hormones, which is increasing our blood sugar, and then that's going to increase insulin, and we're going to get this continual cycle, and we're actually going to cause insulin resistance, and we're going to cause more inflammation in our system through emotional stressors. So that's another big factor, right? Just bad diet in general. So we could be eating a lot of refined vegetable oils, for example, that are high in omega-6 fats, high in trans fat, and that drives up inflammatory cytokines in our system, right? So it just drives up more inflammatory cells and inflammation in general. Obviously, we could be eating a diet high in sugar. We could be eating things that our body has a sensitivity or an allergy to, like gluten or dairy. These are really common food sensitivities that people have that drive up inflammation in our system. And so inflammation is amazing. it's what helps protect against an infection from killing us. We know that more people throughout the history of mankind have died from systemic infections than anything else. Right now, and I'm talking about like meningitis, or people would die from meningitis or pneumonia or something like that. So our body has adapted to create a really intelligent inflammatory process that protects us from dying from an infection immediately. However, we have all these different inputs that drive up inflammation in our body, and that inflammation will kill us slowly over time. And that's what's happening. So we got to keep inflammation under control. It's like a fireplace in our house is a beautiful thing, but if we go in and we dump gasoline on the fireplace, not going to be a good thing. Now the fire is going to start burning up our walls, and that's what we're doing with our lifestyle. It's like we're pouring gasoline on the fire, burning up our walls, burning up the structure of our home.
It's a tough thing what we're doing here in these two chairs. You just rattled off in 2-3 minutes a destructive, it's like a minefield of all of these things. And you have to be so careful. And it would be great if we could get everyone to feel like you are literally walking through a war zone, and in front of you, every step you could take, you could blow yourself up. And even as people do these things that you described, the poor diet, the lifestyle, the stress, and just kind of adapting, if they could actually visually see what was happening on the inside of their body, the chemical responses and the injury to the cardiovascular system, how fast could we change this thing around?
Yeah, sometimes we need that, right? We need kind of that shock value to make a lifestyle change. I think that is important. Now, here's the good thing. When you do start making a lifestyle change, you may not, it's not like you feel the burn of pain when it's in your cardiovascular system. That's kind of, that's why cardiovascular disease is a silent disease, right? Because when you're inflamed in your joints, you typically are going to feel that, right? You're going to have joint pain, and you're going to be a little bit more motivated. Whereas with cardiovascular disease, again, it's silent. However, some of the early warning signs that you have inflammation are you may be out of breath when you go up a flight of stairs. You may just notice more fatigue than general. Maybe hard to get out of bed. You might have fatigue around lunchtime or right after you eat. Oftentimes, this is a sign of insulin resistance. You eat a meal, and then it's like you got to take a nap. Okay, sugar cravings, sweet cravings. So if you eat a meal, right, good quality meal, and then all of a sudden you're like, I just have to have something sweet. That's a sign of insulin resistance, right? So these are all classic signs. You might have more abdominal weight, right? So now you're starting to get more fat tissue, particularly in your abdominal region. That's another warning sign that you're starting to develop these things. In fact, if you can't look down, right, just directly down and see your toes, okay, you should be able to look straight down, see your toes. If you can't do that, you're at an increased risk for heart disease. Right? So as you start to develop more abdominal fat, you promote more inflammation, particularly inflammation that affects those blood vessels. So super important that we're checking that. And those are some of the warning signs that people will notice.
All right. So we're going to shift gears here.
Yep.
And I want to say it in a little funny way because I think a lot of people will relate. We're going to talk about, you're going to help me to define what autophagy is, or autophagy, right?
That's
and I
right.
think a lot of people read that or say it funny. Describe to us exactly what this is and what has this got to do with heart disease?
Yeah, so autophagy actually means self-eating. It's Greek for autophagian, which means self-eating. And this is really important because the body has this built-in mechanism to recycle itself. And when we look at, there's a state of proteotoxicity. And when it comes to the heart, just like any other tissue in our body, we can develop too much protein. And there's a great study in the Journal of Molecular and Cellular Cardiology in 2016 where they looked at proteotoxicity as a mechanism for the development of cardiac hypertrophy, or that would mean like an enlargement of the heart. Now, the heart is a muscle. So, typically like weightlifters want to see their muscles become bigger, larger, and stronger. But with your heart, you actually want it to be very efficient. You want it to have a normal size and to be very, very efficient. When the heart starts to get larger, it's not a good thing. That actually becomes much more inefficient, right, and not able to function well. And what's actually happening there is you're developing scar tissue or abnormal proteins that are on the heart that just don't work well. Right? They don't have healthy functional mitochondria. They're not able to produce a lot of energy. and they just drain the whole system. And so this is a pathological process.
And for people out there to really connect to what you're saying, think of that heart muscle that you described as not a lean fighting machine.
Yeah.
And now it is a swollen, inefficient, the ejection fraction, the stroke volume, everything's becoming more sluggish and going downhill. And that's what translates into a lot of people out there feeling like they can't go up those stairs, not having the energy or the passion to live. They just literally don't have the energy day to day. So this is serious stuff, what you're describing.
Absolutely. And so really what happens here is autophagy is how we regulate proteins in the system. And so what happens here is that when we have certain states, okay, and really for autophagy to be triggered, we need low levels of insulin. Now remember, we talked about insulin as this hormone that takes sugar out of the bloodstream and puts it into cells. Insulin is life-saving because, again, high blood sugar is toxic for our system. So we've got to be in a state of low insulin in order to trigger autophagy. So that would be like, for example, fasting or being on a lower carb diet or exercise. These are all things that help drive insulin down and increase autophagy in our system. And that helps to regulate those proteins. So we either have a growth stage or a repair stage. And insulin is a master hormone that helps regulate this. When insulin's elevated, it's telling our body grow. And it's triggering a gene pathway called the mTOR pathway, mammalian target of rapamycin pathway. So it's all about growth. This is highly active in children. Children need to grow. They're growing really, really quick, okay? Totally fine. However, when we get to become adults, we don't want that much growth. We only want very short periods of growth and actually long periods where we're focused on repair, where insulin goes down, we shut off the mTOR pathway, and then we turn on a different pathway. It's called the AMPK, or adenosine monophosphate kinase pathway. The AMPK pathway triggers certain mechanisms to where we start to repair cells. And again, autophagy is this process where we actually break down little organelles within the cell. Okay, so within every cell, we have things like the mitochondria, which produce all the energy. Those mitochondria become damaged by free radicals, just a normal part of metabolism. The more that we are using sugar, or if we're a sugar burner, if we're eating a higher carbohydrate diet, we tend to damage more of these mitochondria. So we need more repair in that case, right? The better we burn fat, our own body fat for fuel, the less damage we have to the mitochondria, so therefore the mitochondria have a longer lifespan. But we've got to repair these mitochondria no matter what, right? It's a constant process that has to happen. And so when we trigger this AMPK pathway, we go in, basically within our cell, we have something called a phagospore, right? Our body creates this. It basically encircles the mitochondria, the old mitochondria, right? And then something called a lysozyme comes, which is a protein-degrading enzyme, comes in, breaks down the mitochondria, kind of like Pac-Man in a sense, eating ghosts, right, in the game. So it just basically breaks it down. Now it's all these raw materials, and it takes the raw materials and creates a new, healthier mitochondria, a really efficient mitochondria, almost like an embryonic cell, right? A really young, more stress-resilient mitochondria. So this is what's happening in these cells when they have the right environment. So we're taking old cells and turning them into new, healthy cells.
Right,
it's
not to lose anyone here. This is really important what you're saying. This is what's supposed to happen in a low insulin state. And here it is, all I'm thinking about is what you said at the beginning. You diabetics out there taking insulin, got to have insulin. What are you, crazy? Got to do it. And all the healthcare providers I've talked to over the years, the more insulin they take, year after year after year, their body is growing bigger and bigger and bigger and weaker and more inefficient as the years roll along.
That's right, and they have that state of proteotoxicity. So from the heart itself, it becomes really big, swollen, and sluggish, like you were talking about. And then when we look at the actual blood vessels, the blood vessels actually become very, very leaky and damaged, right? So we get inflammation in the blood vessels, and then our body will go through a process to create scar tissue to protect against anything from getting out of the blood vessel itself, and that will create, clotting or plaque that will build up in those blood vessels. Plus, the blood vessels will lose elasticity. And again, now they're going to just become very inefficient, right, and unelastic, and that increases the overall pressure in the blood vessels as well, and reduces the amount of oxygen that's able to cross between the blood and into the cells. So we get lower oxygen utilization.
This is so beautiful what you're describing. I want this to be like in everybody's back pocket. What you're describing is what really happens, and most people are not hearing this. In Western medicine, conventionally trained docs just look at what you just described as a negative thing. They don't see that it's just simply the body trying to adapt, trying to survive, and this is what I gotta do. But if you listen to some of the other things I'm sure you're about to say, and what you've already said, get away from the toxicity, lower your insulin levels, get into a healthier state, then you don't get the injury to your cardiovascular system. It's that simple.
I mean, that is really what it's all about, right? And so, without a doubt, what we've got to do is we need insulin, but only for a short period of time do we need it to have some elevation in it, right? And then we need low levels of insulin for a longer period of time so our body can really get in and do a lot of repair. And as we age, when we have higher amounts of insulin, we reduce the amount of autophagy. In fact, basically, we're on the very, very low end of autophagy. And now we end up with endothelial dysfunction. We end up with cardiac hypertrophy, right? And a lot of different problems that occur with that.
I guess what I'm thinking now is that every other animal except us, David, right? Humans, when they don't feel well, they go away from everybody and everything, and they just stop eating, stop doing everything so that they can feel better, so that they can heal. I know this is a big thing that you talk about, which we're going to move into now, fasting, and how just literally getting away from it all, right, which a lot of people say they want to do. I want to get away from it all. I want to go on vacation. I want to feel better. Just get away from all the stuff you're putting into your mouth could make you feel so much better by just, the way I look at it is just relax all your systems so that they don't respond to everything negative that you've been putting in there. So talk about some of your best fasting strategies and I guess why people should be doing it.
Yeah, well, just like you said, fasting is really the most ancient, inexpensive, and powerful healing strategy known to mankind. Our ancestors have done it. Primarily because food wasn't as available as it is today. They didn't have refrigerators and pantries. Also, you have whole cultures that have built cultural strategies, religious strategies, right? So the Jews fast for Yom Kippur. Pretty much every major tradition. You've got Ramadan. You've got Catholics will fast. Eastern Orthodox Christians will fast for Lent. Different periods of time like that. And so fasting has just been built into many cultures and also just into our genetic blueprint as a whole. Now, here's the best ways to practice it in today's society. So the best ways to implement fasting in today's society, I think intermittent fasting on a daily basis is a great approach. And basically what this is a kind of a time-restricted feeding process. So most people are eating from the moment they get up, right? We're told breakfast is the most important meal. You got to eat within, the first half hour of waking. And then for many people, they're eating late at night, right? Whether it's their work schedule or they just want a snack at night, they're eating before they go to bed.
I usually like to start off the day in the morning with a piece of chocolate cake. And at night, I usually like to finish with that as well. Is that a good direction to go in?
Yeah, no, unfortunately not, right? And so what you really want to do is you want at least 12 hours between your very last meal and your first meal. And I call that the simple fast. So that would be like if you woke up if you started your fast, if you started eating at 7 a.m. in the morning, you would finish eating at 7 p.m. Okay, so that would be a 12-hour eating window, and then you would have a 12-hour fasting window from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m.
And just to be clear for the newbies out there, you are not suggesting that people continually eat from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. though, right?
No. So in general, I recommend 3 meals, okay? 3 meals, no snacking in between. We're told that snacking helps prime our metabolism. That's actually not true. It actually creates mitochondrial dysfunction. So our mitochondria actually become more efficient in between meals when we're in states of lower levels of insulin. So it's very, very important to actually implement some level of fasting, okay, and keep our meals, to separate times in order to create more resilience in our body. So that's a great place to start. Now, what you'll notice is that's pretty easy to do. And you can actually bump and basically compress your eating window further. So then you can go to a 14-hour fast. So that would be like finishing your dinner at, let's say, 6 p.m. and then you don't eat anything until 8 a.m. the next morning, anything with calories. So you can drink water, but you're not consuming anything with calories until 8 a.m. the next morning. So that's a 14-hour fast. And it's actually easy. When you wake up in the morning, you just hydrate. So you're naturally, if you're used to eating when you first wake up, because a lot of people will tell me that, they're like, oh, I can't do that because I'm so hungry when I first wake up. That's actually a conditioned response. You have a hormone called ghrelin that gets released from your stomach when your stomach is empty. And it's also conditioned from the perspective that when you're used to eating, your body will naturally send out this ghrelin signal, right? Saying, hey, this is a normal mealtime, let's eat food. If you drink water and just expand your stomach a little bit, it will suppress the signal of ghrelin. You'll feel more satiated and you'll be able to fast a little bit longer.
I'm going to jump in and tell you, David, that's exactly what happened to me. For years when I was an exercise hound and highly athletic, I was eating pastries and eggs and pancakes and you name it as soon as I got up in the morning. Now, if I eat 6, 7 o'clock or so at night, I get up the next day, it's a green drink, and I'm working and my brain is alert and everything is great. And I'm eating 10, 11, 12 o'clock is when I first start to eat the next day. So we're looking at, 15, 16 hours of no food. But before, when I was younger, impossible. I would have never done it, right? Couldn't believe I could do it. And now it feels so comfortable, just like what you said.
Yeah, I'm right with you. When I was 20 years old, I would eat first thing when I woke up and I'd have to have a protein shake before I went to bed. I thought I'd lose all my weight because I've always been underweight. But actually now I usually do an 18-hour fast on a daily basis. So I eat my meals in a 6-hour eating window. So I eat 2 meals in a 6-hour eating window and I feel amazing. I'm actually stronger than I was back in my early 20s. I have more energy. My brain is functioning significantly better. And that's because my body has become so much more resilient. So your body's going to adapt. As you start this fasting lifestyle, your body will adapt. It will become stronger and more resilient. Now here's the key. When you do eat, you eat well, okay? So you eat till you're satiated. You're not trying to count the amount of calories or just eating really, really small meals. When you eat well, just eat less often, right? So eat 2 to 3 meals a day, but when you do eat, take in a substantial amount of calories so you feel satiated. You shouldn't feel sluggish after your meal, but you should feel satiated so you're not hungry, don't have cravings, and that's going to help, okay? So, and then stay hydrated between meals, and that's going to help give you the kind of energy that you want throughout the day. So ideally, I like to get people into a state where they're able to do a 16-hour fast on a daily basis and eat their meals in like an 8-hour eating window. But we move up in that direction. We lean into it, kind of like exercise. If a 16-hour fast is, let's say, equivalent to walking or running a 5K, if somebody's sedentary, I wouldn't have them walk or run a 5K right away. I might have them, walk a half mile, right? Or walk a mile and then gradually build the fitness to where they could do a 5K. Well, it's kind of the same here with fasting. We don't go right into a 16-hour fast. We'll lean in that direction and start to train the body, hydrate the body, clean up the food quality, because the better your food quality, the easier it is to fast. What I mean by food quality is this, is get rid of as much sugar and grains as possible. Those things just drive up your blood sugar and your insulin. So get rid of sugar, get rid of grains, or at least minimize those. Get rid of bad fats. That's going to be things like corn oil, soybean oil, safflower, cottonseed oil, peanut oil, soybean oil. These are all toxic fats. You're going to find them in condiments, and you're going to find them in a lot of processed foods, right? So we get rid of the processed foods. You check your labels on your condiments, get the salad dressing with the olive oil or something like that. We're getting rid of those bad inflammatory fats. And then do your best to get, when you consume meat, organic, grass-fed, right? Those are kind of the 3 big changes. When you do those things, you're going to notice that you have better energy. You're going to notice that you're more satiated, right? Particularly with your meals, when you do eat, make sure you always have good healthy fats. Things like avocados, olives, olive oil, grass-fed butter, pasture-raised eggs, nuts and seeds. These kinds of things, those kinds of foods, as well as good healthy protein, are going to create more satiation. It's going to make it easier to fast, and then hydrate between meals. That's also going to be obviously very, very effective as well, right? So super important.
And to be clear, when someone is craving, you should know right away. You don't need any fancy medical tests. There's something off with the way that you're eating. Your body's trying to tell you something. And another thing I learned years ago was just the idea that if you know for a fact that you've had a good meal, in your mind 2-3 hours ago, and you just have to eat some more. You don't even know quite what you want, but you're just dying to put something else in your mouth. And you drink a whole glass of water, 8 or 10 ounces of water. This is the idea. Your body is actually dehydrated, and it's looking to food. What's your take on this in terms of a way of hydrating itself? And you might reach for something that's terrible too, but the idea is if you just drink more water, which so many people are dehydrated, that could eliminate your craving most of the time.
I completely agree. In our brain, in our hypothalamus, our hunger center and our thirst center are right next to each other. And because food is so prevalent in our society, and we get a dopamine hit. Dopamine is a hormone that is a neurotransmitter that makes us feel good. Whenever we eat, we get this natural dopamine hit, right? Dopamine is the same neurochemical that's stimulated by cocaine, right? And so it naturally makes us feel good, and that's a great thing, right? It helps drive us to want to eat, which, for the history of mankind has kept us alive. That's a great thing. However, in today's society, most people are trying to deal with emotional issues and stress by getting this dopamine hit from food. So they're constantly snacking and eating and having cravings and eating more, okay? Now, what we want, again, is to hydrate well, right? Now, hydration doesn't give us quite the same dopamine hit. So again, most people are going to the food, but your body's actually really thirsty. And you've had neuroplasticity to where the part of your brain that senses thirst is now dulled, and your body experiences it as hunger. So you think, I'm hungry, I want food, because you've trained it that way, when really you need the hydration, maybe a little bit of electrolytes like some salts or something like that. So yeah, very important. And this is a great thing about fasting. Fasting, whether you're doing intermittent fasting, or let's just say you do like a 1-day fast, or maybe you want to do a longer fast, 3-day fast or a 5-day fast, it really helps reset these neurotransmitters. So it helps get rid of cravings. It helps you have a better relationship with food, better relationship with water, better relationship with understanding the sensations your body is giving you. So you want to have accurate sensations. When you're really hungry, and there may be a time, especially if you're practicing a fasting lifestyle and you're doing a lot of exercise, there's going to be periods where you feel real hunger because your body's saying, okay, I need more calories. I didn't get much calories yesterday. I worked out. I need more calories here. You want your body to be to have a good accuracy, right? And to have a good sensitivity to what it really needs. And that's a great thing about this sort of lifestyle. So going back to what we want to do, if I can get people doing a 16-hour fast on a daily basis, eating 2 to 3 meals in like an 8-hour eating window, that's going to make a world of difference when it comes to keeping your insulin levels down and your blood sugar stable, as well as making the changes when it comes to good quality food. That's super important as well. Now, beyond that, especially if you're overweight, you're diabetic, you're doing everything you can to prevent heart disease, maybe you have a family history, maybe you have certain risk factors, what I really like to do is help people lean into either an 18-hour fast on a daily basis, or at least 1 day a week where we do a 24-hour fast. And that would be like dinner to dinner. It doesn't have to be exactly 24 hours. It could be like 22 hours. But let's say you eat dinner at 5 o'clock every day or 6 o'clock every day. You could fast from 6 to 6, right? So you finish dinner, well, say you finish dinner at 7 p.m., then you fast until you eat at 6 p.m. the following night, right? And for some people, especially people that are overweight, that have had insulin resistance, they actually feel so good with that I've had a lot of people do something called 1 meal a day. It's actually taken off. It's called OMAD, where you only eat 1 meal a day. I personally do this 2 days a week. Okay, even though I'm very, very lean, my brain, I really feel the difference when it comes to my brain, just my mental clarity, my emotional control, my sleep quality, my heart rate variability, which is a sign of overall parasympathetic or really your nervous system, the health of your nervous system is called your heart rate variability. It's the beat-to-beat changes in your heart. Something I test with a ring. I have an Oura ring on my finger here, so I can actually test that at night while I'm sleeping. I notice big changes when I'm doing my one meal a day. I do it twice a week, and it's just made a big difference. It keeps the inflammatory levels in my body down significantly. And then for people that are overweight, that have had risk factors for heart disease, I've seen amazing results. So again, this is not something you do immediately, like right off the bat, but we want to work our way up to where we're able to do a 24-hour fast, and you should still be able to work and do all the things that you normally do with only maybe very mild discomfort. And what most people realize is after about a month or two of training their body to doing a fasting lifestyle, and when they do eat, they eat very well, right? They eat till they're satiated. The 24-hour fast becomes minimally, you have minimal discomfort doing it. In fact, many people notice that they actually feel their best and their most productive while they're doing this. And during that period of time, when you do that one-day fast, your body is doing incredible amounts of healing and repair in your system, rebuilding heart cells that have become damaged, mitochondria that have become dysfunctional and irregular, and actually getting rid of those, turning on new healthy mitochondria, starting to rebuild the blood vessels, right, and actually creating new healthy, stronger blood vessels that have better elasticity, so it helps bring down the blood pressure, right, and you're literally regenerating your body. And so it's so powerful what happens. Not only that, but you're burning fat, you're getting rid of toxins, so just so many good benefits to it.
I know you want to talk about herbs, but before we get there and we close out,
Yeah.
you said something about your ring. I think you
Yes.
don't leave people hanging. You want to talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, so right here I've got an Oura ring. And the Oura ring, it's going to measure things at night while I'm sleeping in particular. So when I'm sleeping, it's measuring my deep sleep, my REM sleep, which is really important for memory consolidation. Deep sleep is very important for healing joints, tissues, right? Just the overall organ systems of the body, right? All very important. And then it's also going to test my heart rate variability. And your heart rate variability is actually the beat-to-beat difference in your heart rate. Now, most people would think the beat-to-beat difference, like the actual gap between beats, should be the same. So let's say I have like 60 beats per minute. Let's say that's my heart rate. It should actually be a variable amount of time between each beat. It shouldn't be a monotone, right? Let's say it was like, 0.2 seconds between each beat. If it was the same 0.2 seconds, that's actually a sign of a nervous system dysfunction. You actually want some level of variability. That's what scientists have found. The more variability in there, the healthier your nervous system is, because it's actually a sign that you can adapt faster. Just in case there was a lion that came out, or some guy with a gun came out, my body could adapt faster than somebody who has a monotone. So your heart rate variability, you want it to be high. And when I'm sleeping at night, I want it to be really high, because when you're in a state where you're more parasympathetic, like sleeping, your heart rate variability should really go up. Okay, and so you're able to track it. What's nice about the Oura ring is I have an app on my phone, and I'm able to look at it every single morning. I can see what my REM was, what my deep sleep was, what my heart rate variability was, what my recovery index was, and that helps me understand how much stress I'm able to handle the next day, or if there's any inputs, maybe meals that I ate or stressors that I had the day before that just didn't sit well with my body.
Wait up, that's freaking me out. So you're saying that's a wireless transmission? People are going to be like, Jonathan, it's EMF. What is the doctor doing?
Yeah, fortunately what you can do is actually you could put it on airplane mode, right? To where it's not actually conducting, you just turn it on for short periods of time. Now I also wear something on my body, and it's called the Harmony Pendant, right? And the Harmony Pendant actually helps to almost like create a shield around my body. So it helps to balance my biorhythms. So if I am exposed to this, or EMFs like all of us are exposed to, throughout the day, that helps my body be able to deal with it and become more resilient through it.
Right, we don't want to get too off topic. I want to get back to the herbs,
Yeah.
but definitely all the things you just mentioned about understanding electrically what we're surrounded with is very important when it comes to either damaging our heart cells
Yep.
or making them feel okay so that they can repair themselves over and over again. Dirty electricity, whether you do have a cell phone too close to you all the time, all this EMF pollution is something definitely to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, EMFs is another one of the toxins that drive up inflammation in the system, can absolutely affect cardiovascular health.
Okay, so as we close out, just some of the herbs that you like to talk about?
Yeah, my top herbs for helping induce autophagy, because autophagy, fasting is the greatest driver for autophagy, okay? But beyond that, exercise is a great driver for autophagy, right? For cleaning up the protein matrix in our system. But then we can also use polyphenols. Polyphenols will trigger autophagy as well. My favorite are resveratrol. Resveratrol comes from red wine, grapes. It's basically in the skin of the grapes. Blueberries have resveratrol, but you can obviously get this in a supplement, much higher dosages that have been clinically shown to help induce autophagy. And that helps improve insulin sensitivity, helps improve mitochondrial function, and helps clean up the bad cells. So resveratrol. We also have things like curcumin, which is the active ingredient, one of the active ingredients in turmeric, the most well-studied active ingredient. So curcumin, high doses of curcumin, epigalactic catechins, which are the EGCG in green tea, also in chocolate and black tea. So the EGCG helps drive this up. You also have carvacol, which is in like oregano, right? Carnosinic acid, which is in rosemary, as well as sage has that. Rosmarinic acid, which is in rosemary, also triggers this. Something called 6-Shagaol, which is in ginger, helps trigger this autophagy. So these are the most well-studied ones. There's also a compound in citrus bergamot as well that triggers autophagy. So these are the most well-studied polyphenols that trigger autophagy. But basically, more or less getting these really revered plant-based foods into the system, plant-based herbs, really great way to trigger autophagy, downregulate inflammation, improve insulin sensitivity, and reduce your risk of heart disease.
Yeah, you've made it very clear, David. We definitely need to expand our diet, not eating so much flour and sugar and toxic animal foods, and start getting into all these herbs and, experimenting with this fasting be super helpful for regenerating our heart. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Up next, as promised, I'd like you to meet Dr. Rashid Buttar as he explains the true reason why millions of people get diagnosed with heart disease. Dr. Buttar will also reveal why most people have the wrong idea about their genetic risk for disease. Plus, you'll also discover one of the most effective ways to improve your blood circulation. Enjoy. First of all, Dr. Buttar, thank you very much. I know you have a huge, busy schedule. You came a long distance to be with me today, so I appreciate you being here with me. So, I know a lot of people who are tuning in right now. They either had a heart attack, they know somebody who had a heart attack, got serious cardiovascular concerns. I don't have to tell you. There's a lot of fear, worry, and concerns. You've got a clinic, you're seeing a lot of people every day. So what is the first thing you're telling people when they come to you?
Well, when people come to us, there are things that we instruct them, we teach them, and we educate them. But really, the number one symptom of heart disease, you know what the number one symptom of heart disease is?
A heart attack, usually, and that's the worst thing, but unfortunately, they don't know before that.
Yeah, it's actually even before a heart attack. It's sudden cardiac death is the number one symptom of heart disease. So you're actually dead before you even know that you have a heart issue. So that's the number one symptom of heart disease. And then, of course, heart attack, you go into the classical, crushing chest pain, shortness of breath, diaphoresis, nausea, et cetera, et cetera. So the first thing that I tell patients when they come, they've got an issue with heart disease is, or they've got a history of heart disease, or they're concerned about heart disease, or if they have symptomology, is relax. Just take a pause, take a breath, and relax. It's going to be fine. It's just like anything else. If you know how to deal with it and you take the right approach, it may take some time. It's simple. It may not be easy, but it's simple. And when I say that, sometimes people get confused. What do you mean by simple? Simple and easy is the same thing. It's not. Simple is that it's a simple process. Easy, it's not easy because you got to do it every day. I can sit here and bark like a dog for an hour and teach you anything. Now, if you don't do it 7 days a week, 365 days a year, if you don't do it and you only do it maybe once or twice a year, then it's, you're going to get those analogous results. So the simplicity of heart disease is that there is oxidative stress going on, which oxidation is actually the causation of all pathology, whether it's cancer, heart disease, neurodegenerative disease, whatever it is, autism. Well, surely it can't be for diabetes or asthma. Of course it is. That's it. So it's all oxidative disease. And I can actually, if you want me to kind of go back to the pathology, the cause of pathology, and then go into heart disease and cancer, and we can focus in on heart disease or cardiovascular system, I'll do so. But basically, it's the oxidative injury that is uncompensated, if you will, or where the oxidative injury is surpassing the body's own mechanisms to reduce the oxidative injury, what typically people would call the antioxidant pathways, which are many different pathways that help to compensate for the oxidative injuries that we're sustaining on a daily basis.
Well, maybe I could stop you for a moment here, because you just brought up a very interesting point. People listening to you right now, Dr. Buttar, why is it that it's hitting somebody's heart or their cardiovascular system instead of their kidneys? Or why am I not just getting plain old diabetes instead of this cardiovascular disease that I have right now? It's oxidative stress. Why me, right? That's what everybody wants to know. So maybe you should break it down. How do you answer somebody that it hit them as cardiovascular disease?
Well, that's a great question. So I can now understand why Jackie was talking about it. It was important for me to talk with you because you kind of threw up that ball and you're asking me to slam it through the hoop. So I get that, and I appreciate that. So really, what is the dynamic here of the interaction between our environments and our genetic predisposition or our biological individuality, our own uniqueness? So I give this example to patients. Let's say we have a husband and wife. They're in their 70s, and they've been together since high school. So they've been together living in the same basic house, in the same environment, eating the same foods, drinking the same water, breathing the same air for the last 50 years. All right? But the wife gets heart disease and the husband gets cancer. Why? Well, the oxidative injury that they're sustaining, the environmental components are going to be one and the same. However, what's unique is their genetic predisposition and their biological individuality. And it's based upon those things. Remember, now I said genetic predisposition. I didn't say genetics. There's a difference between genetic predisposition and genetics. So you may be familiar with the work of my good friend Bruce Lipton. Dr. Bruce Lipton coined the term epigenetics. And so basically, epigenetics is looking at, for those that don't know, that may be listening to us, don't know what epigenetics is. Epigenetics is not putting the weight on the genetics, but rather on the environmental signal that causes the genetics to express themselves in a certain way. So the whole genomic program, it was really an exercise in futility if you think about it, because we've coded all these genes, and we understand, the genes, the BRCA gene and this gene. So there are women out there getting, their breasts removed because of the BRCA gene, and the insanity of it is just mind-boggling. So why am I saying that? So let's back up for a second and let's talk about really what is the genetic code and what it does. So the genetic code in humans is actually the exact. We have 20,000 genes. All right. By the way, earthworms also have 20,000 genes. So we have about the same genetic uniqueness from a genomic standpoint as an earthworm. And a gene is supposed to identify or sequence a protein. So a gene sequences a protein. The only problem is that there are about 100,000 proteins that we've already elucidated, and there's, I'm sure, a lot of proteins that we haven't. So if a gene sequences a protein, and there's 100,000 proteins that we know of and only 20,000 genes, then how is that possible? Well, it's possible because it's actually not the gene that defines the expression of the protein. It's the environmental signal that causes the gene to express itself in a certain manner, if it's A, B, C, D, E, and then the protein that it generates from that gene, based upon the epigenetic component, the environmental component, will then express itself one way or the other. And so this is important to understand because it's our environment. And when I say environment, I'm not talking about what outside environment. I'm talking about inclusive of the outside and internal environment, right? It's just all environment. It's what we're breathing, what we're eating, what we're drinking, what we're thinking, what we're feeling. It's inside our systems, what's happening. All these components create the epigenetic signaling that causes a gene to express itself in a certain manner.
And just to be really clear, to bring us down to earth about this 70-year-old couple that have shared lives together for 50 plus years perhaps, right? You're referring to that man and that woman, what their life experience was like, perhaps basically in the womb, if not before, from their parents, their grandparents, that influenced everything that made them up, even before the two of them met, right?
Well, you're actually opening up another can of worms, which is actually a very important part. So I wasn't going to go into the miasmatic aspect, but we can do that if you want. That'll be interesting to have a discussion on that. But actually what I was trying to show was, like, let's say from the age of 16 onwards, for that 54 years, they were experiencing everything from an environmental standpoint exactly the same, thus showing enough evidence that if their environments are the same for the last 56 years, but one gets cancer, one gets heart disease, has nothing to do with cancer. It's not the cancer or the heart disease that should be the focus. It's actually what is the variable, because they both got the same. They both got two different conditions from the same exact environmental aspect. But why did they get it? And they got it because of the actual genetic predisposition, the biological uniqueness, not because of the genes. Because if it was truly the genes, then they would have the exact same aspect. That one protein would be tied into that one gene. You have that gene, history's over. You don't have any ability to control your outcome because you're defined by your genes, and we know that's not true.
But as we stay focused on this topic, let me just throw something out to you so we can keep unpacking why this is really happening to people. In the 60s, the sugar industry decided, well, we got a great idea. Let's demonize fat, all fat. And that's the main message even up to today, conventionally speaking. Most people think fat is bad, and fat caused my heart disease, and lots of Western-trained docs are telling people, you know what, cut down on your fat. It's going to be good for you. And on that story goes. But where did that story come from? Most people, I don't think, hear that it was the sugar industry that wanted to push that. Sugar is very destructive to the arteries. But how many times does somebody walk into a conventionally trained doc's office, hey, how much sugar you're eating? That's really eating away at your arteries. What? That would be bizarre for people to hear. It's just one tiny example of people not understanding what really could be happening to them that's causing their heart disease.
Yeah, so a lot of these pathologies are actually propagated by the media, if you think about it, because even in the literature, in the medical literature, in the last 10, 12 years, there's a lot of discussion, and there have been conclusive studies that show how hyperinsulinemia is actually more related to cardiovascular disease than many of the other things that we talk about. For example, the cholesterol and all that stuff. Hyperinsulinemia, high sugar levels, are actually much more contributory to cardiovascular disease than are the cholesterol levels. In fact, dietary cholesterol, it's like only 9% impact on our total systemic cholesterol. And this has been one of the things that is a very, very big myth. I know that I'm going to make a lot of people angry, especially a lot of conventional docs, by saying this, but in my practice, I've been a doctor 29 years now, which every time I say that it makes me feel really old, but 29 years practicing, and in my practice, that I can tell you, private practice for 25 years, for all my providers, I have 5 providers in our office, there are only 2 things that they can do that would be grounds for dismissal from my office with no discussion. Actually, there's 3 things. Prescribing a steroid for a cancer patient, prescribing an antidepressant, and prescribing a statin drug. All right? To me, a statin drug is one of the worst things that you can prescribe to somebody.
Now wait, so let's jump into that, okay? The integrative approach by Dr. Buttar. So again, I'm going to play the conventional approach. What are you talking about? Science is clear. We get into that plaque. There's cholesterol in there. Cholesterol is the evil monster because we found it. We know this is a fact. And that's what most people hear. I've got to get my cholesterol down as low as possible. It's going to prevent me from having a heart attack. Right?
Not. Okay? Said nobody. All right, so actually everybody says that. It says, I have never said that. And it's actually interesting because, eggs with the cholesterol, they say the worst thing to eat. So you're talking to somebody with type 2B hyperlipidemia. It's a familial lesion. my triglycerides were, I think, like in the 1,700 to 1,900 range. My cholesterol was probably around 3,000. And there's video documentation of my cholesterol being dropped within an hour. I can drop it within 30 minutes. I can drop it down to below normal levels. And of course, you have to do another IV treatment. But that's not really the answer. So, you want to know what the perfect secret for somebody that has really high lipids that they should be doing?
Absolutely.
Something
Give it
that-
to me.
I mean, it's very, very expensive. All right, it's very expensive. You have to go to a farmer and get eggs, just range-fed organic eggs, and have 2 eggs every day.
With the yolk?
With the yolk, not without not egg whites, not with the yolk. I mean, just think about it for a second. The perfect source of food in this egg, with the right temperature, becomes life. So how could it not be the perfect source of food? Now, we'll get into the diet aspect and all these different things because there's obviously very differing opinions, and I'm a moderate in between. Although I'm looking at probably trying a plant-based diet. I did no meat for probably 5 years when I was bodybuilding, when I was in college. But it was a really tough road to go that route. I remember I used to love Kit Kat bars, and I didn't have a Kit Kat bar for 5 years, and I didn't have a hamburger for 5 years. And actually the first time I had a Kit Kat bar and a hamburger after 5 years, I actually got sick. And then slowly acclimated myself back to it. And so, of course, I don't eat Kit Kat bars now, so you don't have to worry about that. Only raw, the dark chocolate, 65% or higher.
But I think we are talking now to everybody out there about really, at least what I'm getting from you, is really appreciating where somebody is coming from, right? Like, how many times have you heard, I'm fruitarian. I've never felt better. All I do is I eat fruit. And they were clogged up in their arteries with fast food and the worst kind of, now they have fresh organic fruits all the time for a year or two, and they're on top of the world. But will they always stay that way? I think this is where people really need to look. With a good integrative physician, what does my blood look like, all of these things. Don't let me interrupt anymore,
Sure.
but go ahead.
No, it's okay. When you say integrative, I don't know whether I'd be the right physician to be integrative because I don't do much integrative. I mean, I was trained in general surgery, a lot of trauma work, did ER medicine for 6 years, and I have over 12,000 hours of documented ER time. But when you talk about integrative, see, integrative is like when they prescribe a statin drug and then they'll talk about maybe the importance of vitamin C or vitamin E. And that's not how we do things. To me, a statin drug, there's nothing, you can't integrate something like a statin drug. Okay, so the history behind statin drugs, it all comes from, as you very well know, from red yeast rice. Okay, but when they did the studies on the statin drugs, there was one very important aspect that the studies showed that when you take a statin drug, you deplete your body's levels of an enzyme, coenzyme Q10. And I think you're going to have Dr. Sinatra on, so he'll talk more about that. But basically, ubiquinone. Now, this is a very important enzyme in the body, a cofactor actually, because it's necessary for the cellular respiration. So without ubiquinone, you will not have the normal respiratory apparatus functioning, the mitochondria functioning in a cell. That's actually think of it as the lung of the cell, all right? So we know that it's an essential part of life. We also know that statin drugs and all the research has showed that there was a decrease in ubiquinone when given a statin drug, but then when they start prescribing it, there's no talk or discussion about using coenzyme Q10. And when the question is asked, well, why aren't you talking about this? Because clearly the literature talks about if you use a statin drug, you're going to deplete coenzyme Q10, so it has to be supplemented. Oh, well, it's too expensive. So we don't talk about that because it's too expensive for the patient. Never mind the fact that you are now increasing the incidence of hepatocellular carcinoma. That's just one of the things that's been documented. But all the side effects that people experience, with some of the drugs, I won't talk about the brand names because I'm sure that they try to create a problem, but all the statin drugs, they have side effects when you take them, from muscle weakness, lethargy, general malaise, to all the way up to hepatocellular carcinoma and other types of serious metabolic conditions.
Dr. Buttar, just to really crystallize this for people, when somebody's looking to get out of cardiovascular disease or any other kind of condition, you need cellular energy. All I keep hearing you say over and over again, carcinoma, you're mentioning cancer, people losing their energy. The first thing I learned in natural medicine was that if you lose your energy, you're on your way to some form of disease. Fair to say?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's in the Eastern philosophies, they call it chi, right? So, in fact, I know that we're not talking about cancer here, but in cancer, it's a combination of that whole chi is stopped. It's all stagnation. Stagnation of energy, it's stagnation of lymphatics, it's stagnation of emotions. It's all the stuff that's festering and creates an abscess and lingers and just it's the same thing. It's all about chi, really. It comes down to this. So they knew something that we are still discovering.
But to get back to cardiovascular disease, the kidney's starting to get more sluggish, blood pressure's got to go up, your heart is getting larger, it's congestive heart failure, there's fluid around in the lungs. I mean, a person with cardiovascular disease feels out there like they're falling apart, taking blood pressure meds and statins. Hello, this is exactly what we're talking about. You are sapping your body over and over again with less and less energy. What would somebody expect?
Yeah, absolutely, I completely agree with you. To expect anything else would be insanity, because what you're doing is you're depleting. You're already in a state of depletion, and now you're depleting the energy even further, and then you're adding insult to injury with some of these chemicals that are because that's what we're talking about. Okay, when we talk about drugs, these are chemicals that are being taken into the system, and the problem is that humans, especially physicians, or the medical hierarchy, you should say, it's not really physicians, it's more the medical hierarchy, our entire teaching system, our higher educational system, we're very, very presumptuous that we know better than the creator as how the body should really work. And so we give people these chemicals thinking that we're going to alter this function, that function, because we measured this parameter, we did this EKG, whatever, and now we're going to adjust the body to compensate. And that's not how the body works. The body is a self-healing, complete mechanism. It's been designed by the ultimate engineer. It knows what it needs to do. We just need to get the hell out of the way, and we need to give the body what it needs in order to re-regulate. So, it's easy that I can talk about this philosophically, but what does that mean actually, tangibly, what does it mean? What can a person do? So we talked about eggs. So let's talk about, we'll drop, one of my friends does a show called Dropping Bombs. So we'll drop bombs here. Okay, so once we talked about the 2 eggs a day. That's a perfect thing. When you are in this low state of energy, as you mentioned, with not just the heart, but with the whole system, and it's starting to impact everything, and they all are connected, right? The knee bone's connected to the hip bone, everything's connected. People seem to forget that. When you start having a decrease in energy in all aspects of physiology, you're going to have a sluggishness. So one of the things you can do, again, very, very expensive, get out and exercise, all right? And even if you can't exercise and you say, well, I have chest pain when I exercise, well, okay, then just get up and walk a block. What block causes me a problem? Okay, then you walk half a block. Okay, that causes a problem. Get up and walk from your bed to the bathroom and back. Just every day, just do it. And then you'll find that you can take a couple more steps. And each step will be additive, and then you will slowly see progress. Now, why is this important? Because every time you are actually using your system, there's an old adage, right? If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. Well, if you start exercising slowly each day you exercise and you incrementally increase it, you're actually helping the heart compensate and start to wake up. And if you have blockage, then you're going to either, one, open that up. Chances are that's not going to happen, but there's another phenomenon called collateral blood flow development. And so the body will start to compensate and correct for that inadequacy downstream by creating collateral flow or new blood vessels. And those blood vessels, they may not be as big as a main vessel, but they'll be smaller vessels that feed past wherever the occlusion is to then allow for perfusion distal to wherever the plaque or the occlusion is.
This is so huge what you're saying. And again, it's not very sexy. I love the way you keep putting it. Here's a very expensive thing to do. Get off your butt. But all kidding aside, the science is huge. The sitting disease that's happening throughout the world, the Western world, is really serious, as serious, if not worse, than being overweight. So to get people moving, huge point.
Very, very simple to do and very inexpensive. Of course, I was being sarcastic, facetious, as you pointed out. I actually had a patient once that said to me, this was years ago, said, why do you keep on talking about exercise? It's not like you make any more money from it. And it hit me. And so I wrote a prescription, and I wrote the prescription for exercise, handed it to him, and I said, you're going to be charged for this as you walk out. And if you don't pay for it, you will not have a follow-up visit with me. I'm going to discharge you from practice. Ha, 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 I get it, Dr. Buttar. No, ha, ha, you're going to pay him. So he goes up to the front. My front office buzzes me back. What do we charge this on? We don't have a code for this. I'm like, charge him whatever. I don't care. So after the next 3 visits over the next 6 months or so, he goes, okay, I get the point. All right, I get the point. And I said, so what is the point? And he says that it doesn't mean just because something is expensive that it's valuable, that sometimes the free things are actually more valuable. But people don't associate that. And he did finally get it, and then, but the first couple of times he's like, oh, I get the point, stop charging me for that. No, you're going to pay, until he paid for 3 prescriptions. Then he finally got it through his thick head. And he's a great guy, but the point is that the valuation that people think, well, if this is only $1 and that's $500, that must be the better thing. Well, sometimes, you know what, it may be the better thing, but sometimes that $1 thing or the thing that's free is worth a million times more than that because it's free. It wasn't something that you had to pay for, but the payment comes in the price that you have to do on a daily basis.
And Dr. Buttar, what we're doing here is we're breaking conditioning, though, as well. There's a lot of habits going on out there where people have been conditioned to think, when I go to a doctor, the most important thing that I'm going to be told for my heart disease is, what pill should I take? What fancy procedure or technique is going to get me out of these dark woods? And again, you're unpacking a couple eggs, move on a regular basis depending on where you are. Can we go back for just a moment, though? If someone is taking statins and you say it's not so much an integrative approach, because you've already defined that, what you consider to be integrative. So now you're telling that patient, hey, let's work on getting you so that you don't need it. How do you work somebody away from, again, conditioning? Dr. Buttar, I need this statin drug. Don't take this away from me. What do you do instead then?
All right, so Jonathan, you just brought up something. You said people are conditioned to think, and then you went on. So what I would like to do in our conversation here is condition people to think, period. Not to think when they go to the cardiologist this. So I want to condition people to start to think. Because it's important that when a person starts to think, they will have certain things become evident to themselves, those self-evident truths that nobody can argue. So what am I talking about when I talk about self-evident truths? Well, let's look at, again, I have to step back before we go back in specifically into cardiovascular disease, and this is applicable for all aspects of life. So a cell in the body has about 100,000 reactions that are occurring per second, per cell in the body. And when we start to think about the presumptuousness of the medical system, not just in the US, but globally, but as goes the US, so does the rest of the world, the presumption is that I know, doctor, I know, or the pharmaceutical company, that I know how inhibiting this particular reaction is going to have an impact on the other 99,999 reactions downstream in that next second. And that's just extremely, and we may be smart enough to know how that one reaction is going to impact the next one, but certainly not the other 999,000, or 99,998. So we forget that the majority of pharmaceutical components are actually inhibitory. You've got calcium channel blockers, you've got beta blockers, you've got ACE inhibitors. Drugs are designed to stop a reaction, to prevent something from going. The converse of that, and again, this is not 100%, but this is the general rule. Natural substances, minerals, herbs, vitamins, they don't block anything, they enhance, they open up the pathways. They allow that stagnation that you talked about originally to start to be alleviated. So you've got one process that's opening up, the other process that's inhibiting or stopping or blocking. And so that's the reason that when people start to think, just stop right there, think, they start realizing, well, I can take something that blocks something, and I got 999,000 or 99,999 more reactions to go just from that inhibition of that one drug, versus I can just open up a bunch of stuff, and I can't really hurt myself because if the body needs more, it's going to require more, and if it doesn't, well, I'm going to excrete it. And so for me as a doctor, training in general surgery, I'm thinking to myself, well, that makes more sense. In my clinic, the approach is very simple. We first do an assessment. This is an assessment that we call the AHEAD map, Advanced Health Evaluation and Assessment for Detoxification Medical Assessment Program. It's a subjective SF-36 patient outcome-based model that we use to identify the organs of detoxification that are under duress. And we use that information to do two things. One, measure efficacy of whatever the treatment that we're going to be doing. It could be drinking water, it could be standing on your head, meditating, chemo, radiation, bypass surgery, I don't care what it is. You can use it to assess the efficacy of whatever treatment a person is going to choose. And the second thing is you can assess the progress, whether you're getting better or worse on that treatment. So that a head map is, we used to say it's got 350 years of clinical experience behind it, because between myself and the other doctors that put this together, it's still being optimized, but 1999 is when the idea hit me. By 2000, we started the first version of it. In 2010, we went to the first electronic version. It's had over 100 revisions, and 16 other doctors helped me to get it to the point. But actually, that was information that I would say 10 years ago, 350 years. Well, those doctors are all practicing still. It's another 10 years, so you take 16 doctors times 10, plus me 17 doctors times 10, that's another 170 years. So Jonathan, we're over 500 years of clinical experience behind the head map. Now, the head map tells me at a glance whether a person's been coming to me for a week or 20 years. On one page, I have all the information I need to know how to help this person. It is what's led to our clinical success, why patients from 94 countries now come to see us to seek our help from conditions like cardiovascular disease or heart disease or stroke or autism. But it really is, for me, the key with it is that in one page, I know where I need to focus my attention. It doesn't mean that that place where I'm focusing my attention necessarily is going to explain everything, but I know that that one part or two parts or three parts, whatever the three highest things are, is what I focus in on. Because that is going to help, may not help the heart disease that they're coming for or the cancer, but it's going to help with the most important aspect, because it's not the heart disease or the cancer, it's what caused the damn heart disease or the cancer in the first place. And so it's going to deal with the etiology, the causation, and it's going to improve, as you talked about the stagnation, it's going to help to improve that stagnation, release that stagnation, and allow the energy to start flowing in. Because if it's the kidneys and the adrenal glands and PH2 that's causing the problem, as soon as I hit those three things and it starts improving, guess what? The cardiovascular disease issue, the cancer issue, it's going to be now less of an issue. Still may be an issue, and we can focus in on that, but it's giving me the foundation that I need in order to allow the body to start on the process of healing, of self-healing, to open up that pathway.
Dr. Buttar, all I keep hearing is all the voices out there. They're screaming at me right now. They're chomping at the bit. They want to know, Dr. Buttar, give me a little something to taste. So of all your years of experience with all these doctors and this testing and this page in front of you, can you give me a helicopter view? What are some of the biggest things? Is it in the gut? Is it heavy metal toxicity? Is it kidney failure? Is it liver failure? What is it that's happening behind the scenes that you say, wow, most of the people, when we deal with this, that, and the other thing, we do see their cardiovascular issues resolving. What are they?
So the short answer to your question is heavy metals play a huge role in increasing the oxidative stress that is the causation when you see heart disease or blood pressure issues or cardiovascular issues. There are many other aspects, but to me, oxidative stress, it's universal for everything, but heavy metals plays a huge, huge issue. Well, if we can improve the blood flow to the heart, from the heart to the rest of the body, then obviously that would be something that theoretically would benefit. So the process of chelation is something that, well, let me back up from the process of chelation for a second. When a person has a problem, let's say they have a stroke, or they're starting to have TIAs, transient ischemic attacks, or what we call also RINEs. So TIA lasts for about 24 hours. You have full 100% recovery within 24 hours. If it goes more than 24 hours and you still have some residual effects from the stroke, but then within 2 weeks it's completely alleviated and you have no more signs or symptoms, then that's called a RINE, a reversible ischemic neurological deficit. Beyond 2 weeks, and then it's considered permanent, and that's what a full-blown stroke is. So let's just talk about that. We'll categorize that all as cerebral vascular accidents, CVAs, all right? So if that's the condition that we're concerned about or that we're having, then it's one of the carotids. That's usually what the doctors will go in and they'll look at it, they'll do a carotid ultrasound, they say, okay, you need a carotid bypass, and they go in and they do a carotid endarterectomy, which is maybe a 6-inch, 8-inch procedure. They take out the clot. Or if it's a vessel in the heart, which is actually a heart attack, then they'll go in and they'll do a cardiac bypass, we call it CABG, a coronary artery bypass graft. And so when you hear somebody say it was a 3-vessel CABG, it's a 3-vessel coronary artery bypass graft. They had to bypass 3 different vessels that were blocked. Or if it's like peripheral vascular disease, they get cold feet, cold hands, then they do a popliteal dorsalis pedis bypass. It's a big vessel. They harvest it from some other part of the body. So this is, you're talking about 2 feet, you're talking about 18 inches, you're talking about 6 inches of bypassing this, okay? The problem is that we have about 65,000 miles of blood vessel in our bodies. So how can you say that this one segment, if it's affecting here, that it's not affecting the rest of the segment? You can't. And the problem is that you cannot deal with a chemical process, i.e. atherosclerosis, with the mechanical means, i.e. bypass. You have to have a chemical solution to deal with a chemical problem. You have to have a mechanical solution for a mechanical problem. Here, this is not a mechanical issue. It's a chemical issue, and we're correcting with the mechanical means, and that's what the problem is. So now we come into the world of chelation, and chelation is essentially something that you're not just dealing with this issue or this issue or this issue. You're dealing with the entire cardiovascular system, the entire circulatory issue. And essentially what chelation is, it's the infusion of a chelator, which is defined as a substance that goes into the body and comes out of the body exactly the same way. The body doesn't utilize it, but because it's totally inert, but it is bound to metals or minerals. It'll go in and it'll bind to something, pull it out. So it's basically a hunter for certain components and hunts it, finds it, pulls it out of the body.
Pac-Man.
It's a Pac-Man, exactly. So sometimes people will say, well, if you take humic minerals or you take this substance or you take that product, it'll chelate you. Complete ludicrous BS. It will not chelate you. Humic minerals or some of these things may displace heavy metals and help, replenish the body, but it's not chelating. It's not removing it out of the body. Okay, there's a difference between displacement and chelation. Chelation is a very specific thing. So the word chel comes from the Greek word of the pinching action of a crab's claw. So it basically binds onto a metal or a mineral. So minerals are metals, you know that, right? So for everybody understanding, metals and minerals, this is all metals. So it binds onto a metal and pulls it out. Now, there are various types of chelators out there. There's EDTA, DMPS, DMSA, DMSO, all sorts of different chelators. Some of them are dangerous, some of them are very effective. So let's talk about one of the most effective chelators out there that'll pull out mercury, for example. It's a chelator called British analucite. It was used during World War II for nerve agents, when you see in the movies that stab themselves when there's chemical gas attack. Very, very effective chelator. But the problem is that it causes denaturing of the protein. So there's a sulfhydryl group within the proteins, and the sulfhydryl group, the terminal end of the sulfhydryl group is where the mercury attaches to. So yes, British analucite will go in and not only just pull that metal, that metal off the end of the sulfhydryl group, because when we use other chelators, that's what's doing it. But there's also sulfhydryl groups within the protein structure that are not hanging out the terminal end. British analucite will go into the cell and actually into the protein and pull the mercury off those sulfhydryl groups. Very effective, but it causes a denaturing of protein. So there's 1 out of 5 people that use British analucite will die. So you cannot have a treatment that you're going to have. It's an effective chelator, but it's not clinically sound. You can't use it because it's just, it's very good at pulling out the metals, but mercury, but it's not conducive to life. So we use one called DMPS, dimercaptose propanosulfonate. There's other ones that are used, but in certain parts of the world, they're considered to be neurotoxin, like DMSO. DMSA, dimercaptose succinic acid. So I know this isn't. Let's just, sometimes a little bit of information can be dangerous, so we won't go into the specifics here. But suffice it to say, the chelators go into the body, they pull out metals, and when they pull out the metals, why is that important? It's because those metals have been shown in various studies to cause the lipid peroxidation on the endothelial wall lining of the vessel. So you've got a vessel wall, and in the inside lumen of the vessel, the metals are causing oxidative injury in the vessel wall, and that oxidative injury then initiates a cascade called an atheroma formation cascade, which essentially is the band-aid that the body says, oh, there's an injury here, comes in some micro-injury, and then comes in to patch that micro-injury up using fibrin, fibrinogen, the cholesterol, all the different, thrombin, all this stuff comes in to kind of protect, to create a band-aid. Like you think of it as a crack, it's coming to form that crack. But as that process to form the crack gets bigger, 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 it causes an occlusion in the vessel wall, and that's where the blockages or the atheromas formed, and thus the person ends up having a heart attack because the blood can't get past it. So we want to negate that process. If you can stop the micro-injury, the oxidative stress on the endothelial wall lining by removing the heavy metal, which is one of the biggest culprits of causing that oxidative injury, then theoretically you shouldn't have that blockage forming, and that's exactly what we've observed.
This is how much conventional medicine, Western medicine, is so clueless about everything you're talking about. They love to pin on you, you're trying to cure heart disease, and I hope everybody's staying with you because I know I am. You're trying to cure heart disease by taking heavy metals out of the body. You're a lunatic. No, you're trying to remedy a heavy metal toxicity in the body, which is a nasty thing to have in your body for a number of scientifically proven reasons. That's it. That's all
Right.
I hear.
And in this particular case with heart disease, we're trying to remove the burden to prevent the microvascular oxidative injury so that we stop the cascade from continuing to form that massive clot later and causing somebody to have sudden cardiac death. But the bottom line is we want to improve the vascular supply to the entire body. And so when you do the process of chelation, specifically using EDTA, which is each one of these chelators have a different propensity for different metals, all right? Now, when I say metals, as I mentioned earlier, that includes minerals. Minerals are metals. But certain minerals are essential for life. For example, iron is essential for life, but too much iron will also kill you. So iron is necessary in the hemoglobin. Actually, the hemoglobin, the ability of the hemoglobin to bind to the oxygen as an oxygen carrying capacity is a direct function of the level of iron. But if it's too high, then it acts like a heavy metal and causes more oxidative injuries. So certain things like selenium, very, very effective, and as a mineral that's necessary for life, and copper, necessary for life. But in high levels, copper or selenium will also act as a heavy metal like lead, tin, arsenic, antimony, mercury, etc.
All right, but I don't want to lose you here on this one. Would you say that the chelation that you use, or all chelation in general, just help me out with this, is stripping the body of what you don't want, but it's also pulling out those minerals? Is it a matter of replenishing the body when you're going through this kind of thing? Just help me out with that.
Yeah, very, very good question, and thank you for reorienting me on this, because this is an important part. The process of chelation is very, very effective, but it is not selective. It pulls out the good and the bad. So we want the bad to come out, but sometimes doctors forget that the good is also coming out with it. And so the problems that have been associated are 99.9% of the time because those good things that are being removed, those essential things that are being removed, have not been monitored, or the indiscriminate use of the treatment. Because people say, well, there was this case that a person died from chelation therapy. Well, you know what? How many there's 55,000 cases of people dying from Vioxx before the FDA pulled it off. So you can start talking about specific things, but it's not the tool. It's the, as I like to say, the idiot wielding the tool that we have to look at. So yes, anything is dangerous. Aspirin, Tylenol, over-the-counter stuff is dangerous if you take it the wrong way. But if it's done the right way, it's very, very safe, and basically it's pulling out the bad but the good as well, and we just have to monitor and make sure that the good is being replenished adequately, the body's assimilating it, absorbing it, utilizing it, and then it's all good to go. But one thing that from a supplement standpoint, no matter what anybody says, this one supplement, actually there's two supplements, just go out, I don't care where you get it, I don't care the brand name, there's many different variations of these things, but vitamin C and magnesium. If you do vitamin C and magnesium, those two things will help you from your cardiovascular standpoint, okay?
I think a lot of people get that already. Heavy metals, not good to have in the body. They act like bullies. They have a lot of destructive power. They're taking nutrients away from the body. People know that. I mean, the whole idea of feeling better is we've got to have enough nutrition in our body to do what it needs to do normally. So it makes a lot of sense to get those heavy metals that are too much in the body, to get them out. But what else do you do to help support a body so that it's healthy and strong, and then people can live a healthier life?
Specifically with cardiovascular disease, we want to give the body what the body is deficient in. So a lot of times in cardiovascular disease, there's a mineral imbalance. So we mentioned earlier magnesium. So there's a calcium and magnesium ratio that's ideal in the body. Usually when we take certain types of supplementation with minerals, there is a quality issue, one, obviously. There's also a quantity issue, two. The quantity sometimes is not sufficient, or the quality of it is poor. And sometimes even how it's bound, sometimes it may not be a utilizable form, meaning that you have the right form and you have the right dosage, but because the body can't assimilate it, can't digest it, break it down, or cannot assimilate it, it's pointless. So these are the different things that we want to look at for all nutrient supplements or anything that you're taking into the body. How is it going to be utilized? Now, having said that, calcium to magnesium, calcium in most forms is not bioavailable. So you want to have a good bioavailable source of calcium and magnesium, and you want it to be in a 2-to-1 ratio. The reason why in a 2-to-1 ratio is because that's how the balance is in the body. If you have high levels of magnesium, which actually as a society, as a global society, we're magnesium deficient. But if you were to have high levels of magnesium, you'd really have to look at it, the calcium to magnesium ratio, to decide if it's really high, because it's a relative deficiency. In other words, the balance, it's not just the absolute high or low levels. As you know, Jonathan, the way that they decide if something's too high or too low is they take a group of people, 400 usually, depending on what lab test it is, or sometimes 800, and then they take the mean, and then they do standard deviations, and they say this is the normal. Anybody beyond that is considered too high or too low. The problem with that is if you have a population that's completely skewed on one side, and you take 2 standard deviations below the mean or above the mean, the problem is that everything's going to be off, and you're going to get a false sense of security. Oh, I'm normal. Yeah, you're normal for all the sick people that are normally out there. So we have to be aware that magnesium deficiency is pretty much endemic in the whole world. And when you have, looking at the magnesium levels that they traditionally look at, which very few doctors actually would measure magnesium levels, but I mean the test itself would probably be 5 times as the cost of supplementing a whole year of magnesium. So the point is, even if you go to Walmart and get their magnesium citrate, which is usually used as a laxative, it's a great form of magnesium. Take 2 tablespoons, just get the magnesium. That's the point.
And just to be clear, you said 2-to-1. Is it the calcium that's more than the magnesium, or the other way around?
2 parts calcium, 1 part magnesium. But because, and again, I'm telling you, when we're looking at test specimens post-treatment metal assessment to see what the level of heavy metals are and essential minerals are in the body, that's what I'm kind of looking for. But for the everyday person, if you have a cardiovascular issue, find some magnesium and start taking it. You don't have to worry about the 2-to-1 ratio, because chances are that's not an issue for you. 99% chance that's not going to be an issue for you, because everybody's got a lot of calcium in the body. You don't have enough magnesium. We get calcium in everything that we're eating, right? Everything that we're drinking, we're getting calcium, calcium, calcium. You got the infomercials out there, or the commercials out there talking about drinking milk and how important it is for calcium. So we inundate the body with calcium. Nobody talks about magnesium. So we're all in a relative state of magnesium deficiency.
And this is extremely important, this point, before we go on to other things that you want to bring up, is that the idea that the body has so much calcium floating around, and people are like fossils. They're calcified, this hardening of joints, hardening of the arteries, all of this, you really don't want to get out of control with too much calcium.
You're absolutely right. And calcium, let's make sure that we do understand calcium is very important for life. But calcium in the wrong places is not good, all right? In fact, calcium is an extracellular, outside the cell mineral. If you find calcium inside the cell, that's usually a sign of cancer. Okay, so cancer is something where calcium intracellularly is associated with suppression of apoptosis. Apoptosis is programmed cell death. In order to preserve the whole, the body has this apoptotic mechanism. If you have calcium going inside the cell, that is actually now a bad thing, and that is considered inappropriate. It's considered wrong. It's considered the wrong way to go. That calcium, intracellular calcium, is not where you want to be. So, somebody, I don't want to scare anybody thinking, oh, wait a second, I don't want to make sure that my calcium doesn't go inside my cell. It's not supposed to be in the cell. It doesn't normally go in the cell. If you have it going in the cell, you will be diagnosed with a tumor. You'll know about it, so you don't have to worry about that. My point is, again, calcium is normally outside the cell, magnesium is inside the cell, and we want to make sure that the body is getting enough magnesium to compensate for the calcium and everything gets balanced out. So what you mentioned about calcium being in the wrong places of the body, this is actually a very important part. So calcium is very important for teeth, very important for bone, but then inside the tendons, right, inside the lung tissue, the old granulomatous disease, all those areas, that's where calcium should not be. So calcium inside the sarcoplasmic reticulum is very important. It's needed because it's necessary for the actin, myosin, myofibrils to be able to contract, and so that when I go and scratch my head, that muscle action is dependent upon calcium. So I don't want anybody to think that, oh, we get too much calcium, calcium is not important. Calcium is very important, but without the right ratio of calcium to magnesium, you're going to cause, as you said, a problem with your heart. And so you want to make sure that you're getting adequate amounts of magnesium. So that's one. We mentioned vitamin C. That's another component. So you want to have a bioavailable form of magnesium, of vitamin C, and there's many other components that you usually have, like vitamin C with something else. And so again, a bioabsorbable aspect is very important. The body has a certain threshold that it can handle. Beyond that threshold, you can end up having a cathartic effect. So you have like 3 grams of vitamin C. If you've not been taking vitamin C normally, you may have a cathartic effect. You may get some loose stool, but diarrhea. So you have to be careful with those kind of things. But you want to, it's better to do this stuff, a couple of times throughout the day so your body's getting a steady infusion, or they have time to release things. You can look at that, etc.
And Dr. Buttar, to put this to rest, I want to get your feedback on this. I have a feeling I know how you'll respond, but it's still important to air this out. A lot of people out there who are new to vitamin C would probably naturally think, well, what are you talking about, Dr. Buttar, Jonathan? Vitamin C in apples or oranges. If I need vitamin C, I'll just get it from the food. But we're talking about people who don't feel well. They're very low in energy, they're congested. Now we're talking about a quote-unquote unnatural form of vitamin C, but it's really ascorbic acid. That's vitamin C. Yes, it was produced by a lab or a place, and then you're taking it in a supplement form, but it's very non-toxic to the body. And the way I see it, it's helped a lot of people from everybody I've interviewed, all the doctors. Lots of this form of vitamin C is helpful for the body. What's your take on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that these supplements all, and also drugs, they all came originally from natural sources. It was a certain active ingredient. They wanted to synthesize it in the lab and make it more efficient without having to, kill so many trees or so many cows or wherever they get it from. So they came up with synthetic ways of making this stuff. So there's nothing wrong with that. What we want to be more concerned about is assimilability, all right, absorption, digestion, that the stuff actually, you don't take it and then it comes right out. So there's the most popular brand of vitamins. I'm sure that if I said it with your visibility, with my visibility, we'd have a lawsuit, so I'm not going to say the name of the company, but it's the one that you see at GNC stores. It's all advertised on TV. It's supposedly the world's most recommended multivitamin. The problem with that multivitamin is that I've had multiple patients tell me, one of my patients from New York told me that her brother worked for the sewage department. And he said that they saw so many, this particular pill has a certain letter on it, right? They said they have so many of those pills in the sewage system, they even considered contacting the company to say, hey, you want to come and get these things, wash them off, and then recycle them, okay? That's how much of this particular brand, it just doesn't break down. So there's no point in taking a supplement if it's constantly being, it's not breaking down, it's remaining constant.
While we're on the topic of supplementation for vitamin C, I would imagine we'll talk about what's great for the artery health, vitamin D, you'll get into some other things, you've mentioned magnesium. Is there a distinction you make with people who are so depleted in energy in terms of like powders or liquids versus these tablets and capsules all the time? Is that somewhat easier on the body, or you don't necessarily see that?
I think that it probably is easier. Anything that allows a person to be able to take something on a consistent basis. If you're swallowing a big horse pill, it may become difficult. If you're drinking something and it's palatable, it's going to be a lot easier. If you drink it and it's terrible, chances a person's not going to be compliant. So those type of things do have a role. I think a liquid is going to be able to assimilate better, or time release. I think tablets are going to be a little bit harder. Capsules may be easier because they're easier to swallow, and also they usually are time release, so they'll dissolve. So these are all various things, and again, it depends on the individual. Some people can tolerate it, some people can't. I would probably say that a powder or liquid would probably be preferred, but some things are not palatable. So you say, okay, yeah, I can get it in the liquid form, and yeah, it's going to be easier to assimilate, but then the person's never going to take it because it tastes like crap, and so then you've got those problems.
Right.
So based upon those variables, I try to give it to a person in a way that I know that they're going to be consistent with it. Even though it may not be in a liquid form or in a powder form, I know that they're going to take the capsule much more readily. All right.
So what other supplements, if you want to go there, but even, I know your clinic, you get into a lot of things. What other kind of therapies help people with their circulation in general?
All right, so one of the things that I have found that I know a lot of doctors don't talk about is allicin, all right, from garlic. So garlic and ginger are just great for improving circulation. And there's a general, we have certain formats, but I'm going to tell people, again, something very difficult for them to do. You got to go through, it costs a lot of money and blah, blah, blah. So go to your health food store, or go to just your regular grocery store and get ginger, and you want to measure it from the size of your pinky. If you got big hands or small hands, basically if you just take your digit, your last digit, or even that's the nail bed level of ginger, and you chop it up you dice it up, and then you throw it in some hot water, like enough for like a cup of tea or something, and then you boil that. You leave it in there. You don't take it out. You let the cool down temperature, and then just drink that component. At the end of it, the pulp from the ginger will be there. Just scoop it up with a teaspoon and eat it. You do that every other day, you'll never need to worry about a circulation issue. Okay, that's the most effective way at thinning the blood and having the blood not coagulate. Hypercoagulability states are going to be problematic. Now, of course, the powers that be would be very, very against that, but they can't really, you can't make a certain type of recommendation of something, because if I say water will cure your dehydration, I've just made a drug claim. And now I've said that water is a drug, and they're going to try to regulate water. And this is not an exaggeration of Dr. Buttar, you're trying to be facetious here. No, this is actually an example that the FDA gave me when they came into our lab, and they said this exact example. They said, it's not our issue. You got a problem with that? Go to your legislators, because we're just enforcing the law. Okay, so that's how the laws have been written, and that if you say that water will cure your dehydration or it will help you with your dehydration, you've just made a drug claim on water. So that's how ludicrous it is. So what I'm saying is, from a structure function standpoint, if you take ginger, which is a food, it's not patentable, right, and you dice it up and make a tea out of it, you're going to improve your function of your circulatory system by far. You can actually do the same thing with garlic, except garlic's going to be a little bit harder, and so you can't necessarily do that as easy with garlic, but there are ways you can supplement that. Now what's interesting is that if you look at the conventional way of thinning blood, you've got the things such as Coumadin, okay? And so you've got this intrinsic and extrinsic pathway of clotting that we talk about. So when you are being prescribed a drug like, say, we'll use a generic version, Coumadin, I want people, I'm not going to say what it is, I know you probably already know what Coumadin is, but I want you to actually do a search on your internet and find out what Coumadin is used for, okay? And I want you to see the active ingredient in Coumadin, and I want you to see the active ingredient in rat poison. And I want you to tell me what the difference is. And of course, I'm not going to say any more about it, but people, when they start to understand, when somebody says something about, oh, this is just like X, they're going to think, oh, it's a figurative, metaphorical statement. They don't think it's a literal, that's actually what X is. But go and do a search and just see, what that is. It's problematic for me to tell people with a prescription to take something that is the same active ingredient as rat poison.
Dr. Buttar, this is extremely important. I hope we're not losing people. That is the point, that people need to educate themselves. That's why I do these events, because people are frustrated. Why doesn't the doctor just tell me? Because of the position that you're describing that you're in. You have to be so careful. This game that we play about getting information out to people, but I think most people get it. They're listening to you right now. We see so many people running all over the place with dark blotches under their skin, thinning their blood with pharmaceutical medications, and intuitively they know something's got to be wrong. This is internal bleeding. This is not a joke.
Right. Well, there's various things that can cause that skin, but you're right, the skin lesions, one of those, the bruising is a very common thing that you see with people that are elderly that are on blood thinners. There's all sorts of disruptions within, creating blood dyscrasias that are very problematic and potentially lethal. So we have to be very careful with those types of things. But ginger and garlic are two natural occurring food substances that can be used to help improve vascular supply and prevent the coagulation aspects.
What about cayenne pepper? What have you got to say about that?
Very, very effective. Cayenne pepper is very effective, not just from a perfusion and circulatory standpoint, but as an anti-inflammatory component. Very, very effective. And the one thing with cayenne pepper is that we have a very potent form of cayenne pepper. In fact, we had to stop using it because it would burn the heck out of your tongue. And so we have to figure out a better way of having cayenne pepper being utilized. But they are time-release powders, that are capsules, encapsulated, that are very effective. And so yes, cayenne pepper is very effective and very good. I would highly recommend it, not just for circulatory issues, but also from the inflammatory cascade that would be a part of the healing process that forms that atheroma. So it's good from that too.
Dr. Buttar, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the final day of the cardiovascular DocuClass, and now I've got a special announcement to make. You see, during the filming of this event, I asked many of these health experts to talk about lung health. So tomorrow, you'll be able to get instant access to the very best segments we could put together about lung health for a 9th and final day of this event. We'll be emailing you very soon about this, so stay tuned. By the way, if you'd like a copy of the Cardiovascular DocuClass, plus all the other bonuses available right now at special discounted prices, simply click the link you see on this page and choose the package you want. Talk to you soon. Take care.